Hello, everybody, to the Lebanon Thora podcast. I'm your host, Adnan Nasser. In the immediate aftermath of the Al Qaeda attacks on 9/11, President Bush, the son, announced that and its brutal dictator Saddam Hussein had links to the murder of almost 3,000 Americans. That had turned out to be false. The world was warned that the next strike could take the form of a mushroom cloud ignited by an Iraqi weapon of mass destruction, another false accusation. But these were the reasons that led to the United States to go to war with Iraq in 2003, that directly led to the overthrow of the Ba'ath Party and its leader, Saddam Hussein. Since that time, the Iraqi people and the world, frankly, have had to endure consequences of that decision, from the collapse of order, sectarian gang killings, corruption on an unprecedented scale, Iranian influence, and of course, the rise of ISIS. Today, I'm being joined today by former CIA analyst John Nixon. He was the CIA analyst who had interrogated the former Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein, and he had written a book about his experience debriefing the president, the interrogation of Saddam Hussein. John Nixon, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Saddam, first question, were you in favor of the Iraq War?
Yes, yeah, I was. I thought that Saddam was everything that we had been told that he was, and everything that I had seen in terms of open source and intelligence showed me that that he was a dictator and that he really had just misled his country and really had driven Iraq, which is a very proud nation, had just driven it into the ground. And I was like, something, this man needs to go, and maybe the Iraqi people will have another chance and a better chance at life. And so I was a supporter of the war. And also I believed in WMD. So.
And what, have you changed your mind since then?
Completely. The war was an absolute, utter disaster. Nothing good came from it. Certainly nothing good for the United States. It's just, and for the Iraqi people, it has been an utter disaster. And it's 18 years now we're going on, and the thing is, that the region has suffered from it. Again, I don't know anybody who comes away thinking to themselves, "Wow, we're in a better position." Having the United States having removed Saddam from power, we're in a better position than we were before, with the exception maybe of Iran. So I believe that the war was done under false pretenses. And it really changed the way I view my government and the way I view American foreign policy in general. I used to think of America as being a force for good in the world. Now I see it more as a force for instability.
Now, when you had met Saddam Hussein, prior to that engagement, you had studied up on this man, correct?
Yes.
And
yeah.
What some of the expectations, and did he meet all those were there things about him that were surprising to you?
Yeah, I had read a great deal about him, both, as I said, in the open source media, and also in intelligence reporting. I would say that I felt like I knew him, and I felt comfortable talking to him because I felt like I did know a great deal, but yet there were things that he said to me. First of all, I was kind of blown away by when I first met him. Just the way he sort of had his world. He'd basically been captured. I saw him the night that he was captured. That was the first time I met him. And his world had basically been turned upside down, and I couldn't get over how calm and collected he was. And then as I got to speak with him on almost a daily basis, I was amazed at his political skills. He was a real, he was very charming, and he could put you at ease, and he could be really seem like a really nice guy. And yet there were also parts of him where he was really nasty, like a really nasty individual, and you'd see a dark side as well. And I kind of, at first I was a little taken aback. I didn't expect to see the nice Saddam. I kind of was expecting the caricature that we had sort of built up in our minds over decades. But as I said, he had amazing political skills. And you could see why this man was so successful in terms of just like glad handing and being a politician. He understood his country very well, and he understood his countrymen very well. And that's why he stayed in power for so long.
Now, when you said that he understood his country so well, he had warned in your book, you had said that he had told you that the United States was going to fail in Iraq and its mission in Iraq because it doesn't understand the history, the culture, or the language. Can you go a little deeper into that?
Sure, sure. I remember him saying this to me, and we were just talking. It was one of our first sessions, and he said, "You know, you're going to fail here." And I looked at him kind of in astonishment. I said, "Fail, Saddam?" I said, "You're sitting here a prisoner of the U.S. military. Your government is no more. You can't command anything anymore. Your army is defeated." And it's basically gone to ground. And how can you be? How are we going to fail? And that's when he said, "You're going," because I was looking at it very much in the moment that you know, we won. You're captured. He was looking at it in a much broader sense. And Saddam really did have, like, when we talked, I mean, he tended to see things in a broader way. Which is not unusual for dealing with people from the Middle East, and especially for Americans dealing with people from the Middle East. But you know, he was looking at this like in the broader sense, and he just said, "Yeah, you know, you don't understand us, basically, you know." And when he just went down the list of, you know, you don't understand our history, you don't understand the Arab mind, you don't understand our language, you don't understand our geography, you're just going to fail. And I at the time, I remember thinking, you know, you've got a point. I didn't want to cede that to him, but in my head, I was like, you're absolutely right, because I knew from just interacting with the military and with my colleagues at CIA and everybody else that was in country, there were a lot of people there that, you know, before 2003 might not have been able to place Iraq on a map.
Now, with you mentioning all these things about Saddam Hussein and his personality, did he, apparently from your book, he could not fathom why the United States would want to overthrow him in the post 9/11 era. He was expecting some sort of rapprochement and that the US would engage in a realpolitik, so to speak. Him?
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the more surprising things. You know, I ended up. It was really weird. Years later, on NBC there was a I think it was the 20. It was the 30th anniversary of the Gulf War, or no?
Well, the 13th, you mean?
20th
20th,
anniversary,
okay.
2011.
2011, okay.
Yeah, this year is the 30th.
Yeah.
In 2011, I remember seeing this thing on NBC. It was a special looking back at the Gulf War, and they had Scowcroft and Baker and Dan Quayle and Schwarzkopf on the phone, and a number of other people from the Bush administration, and they were talking about this, and they said, well, you know, what happened with Saddam? I mean, we supported him during the Iran-Iraq War, and Baker and Scowcroft looked at each other, and they just said, well, I don't know, we were getting along fine, and then he just changed. And I watched that, and I thought, oh my God, because I had asked him the same question. I asked Saddam the same question. I said, you know, we supported you during the Iraq War, the Iran-Iraq War, and he said, I don't know, we were getting along fine, and then you guys changed on me, you know, and it was the same answer, and it was astounding. And he had wanted a relationship with the United States for a very, very long time, and even during the time of sanctions, he periodically would send feelers out to the United States saying, can we talk? And a lot of times these things were just dismissed outright, you know, and it's a series of missed opportunities where we can turn things around if we have the will ourselves. And instead, we have a decade of sanctions on the Iraqi people, a decade of no-fly zones in which we're putting our pilots in harm's way, a decade of just, you know, of just a policy that's not really even a policy. It's just it's nothing, but it's making everything. It seems to be making everything worse. And then 9/11 happens, and 9/11 is the moment where everything changes. And the one person who doesn't see that change is Saddam Hussein, and he doesn't realize that on 9/12 that he is now in he's been in the crosshairs of the United States for a long time, but now he's in the crosshairs, and somebody wants to press the button, and remove him.
No, you were saying that both the United States and Saddam Hussein had the same feelings towards each other. They were both mind-boggled at why they could not have a relationship. They both accused each other of changing, of almost betraying one another. But that did not change the fact the United States was once his ally. And the United States was a longer ally of the Ba'ath Party. I mean, I know you were you're a former CIA analyst. Has anyone ever approached you, or have you ever found evidence that the United States had backed the Ba'ath Party against the former president of Iraq, Abdul Karim Qasim, in what was widely known as the Ramadan Revolution?
Yeah. Something, I've heard about this, and it's been talked about a lot, and there have been papers written, and I know that there was an op-ed in the New York Times by Roger Morris, in which he said, because he was working on the National Security Council at the time, he said that there was CIA backing for the '63 coup that brought the Baathists into power, and then of course they came back in '64, or they were removed in '64 and then came back in '68. I have never seen any evidence whatsoever myself about Saddam getting CIA backing during those years. Up until, during the years that he's in exile in Egypt, or during the time when, they get rid of the Abdul Karim al-Qasim regime. Again, I've never seen it, and I don't know. But on the other hand, I will say this: I looked in CIA records when I was an analyst there, and I looked for information about this. But the thing is, their computer systems would only go back to maybe like in the early 80s or late 70s. And after that, everything is hard copy. And I'm not sure that their record keeping was so great. So I can't say that it was a definitive, it's a definitive no, but I've never seen anything. So
fair enough. But we do have records, and we even have recordings of American officials meeting with Saddam Hussein at the height of the Iran-Iraq War. That famous footage of Donald Rumsfeld meeting with Saddam in Baghdad, shaking his hand.
yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, when at that time, Saddam Hussein must have thought that things were going pretty good. I mean, he has America behind him, he has the Arab world behind him, and even friends in Europe, specifically France, who built him the Osirak Dam. That was the spear of his nuclear program.
Yes. A lot of people think that the United States was driving that relationship, but really it was Iraq. And Saddam was the person who really reached out to the United States. And this was the first, and he does so. I recently read a book we were talking about before called King's Counsel by a man named Jack O'Connell, and he was the CIA station chief in Amman, Jordan, in the late 60s and early 70s. And he mentions how Saddam, basically, the Iraqi regime was sending out feelers to the Reagan administration, and they said they want to have a relationship because they feel that if they don't have a dialogue going, there's going to be misunderstandings, and that will only bring bad things. Words could never be truer than that. And so when Rumsfeld Rumsfeld's going to be in the region, and they have him stop off in Baghdad. And one of the things that's really fascinating is that Rumsfeld wants to, Rumsfeld wants to run for president at some point. And he has backers, and he realizes that the Jewish community in the United States have money to donate to a potential candidate. So he comes up, he has this idea that's been given to him, which is to basically have a pipeline run through Jordan. And so, have this pipeline so that Iraq can get its oil out, so it's not vulnerable to Iranian attack.
Mm-hmm.
And this way it'll be much safer. You can have it go through Jordan, and then it's going to have this Haifa spur, which is something that had existed in the I think in the 30s or the 40s, but had gone dormant. And King Hussein opposes this simply because he doesn't want to give Israel something for nothing. He feels that they should have to pay a price for this. So it doesn't really go anywhere, but Rumsfeld's a big proponent of this. And then subsequently in 2003, the neocons in the Pentagon try to resurrect this thing again. And it shows the power of this idea, some of these ideas that we think are kind of kooky, but they stay. And from my vantage point, if Saddam had said yes, if he had said yes to this, then I think he would still be alive today.
Or like he wouldn't have been overthrown in 2003.
Exactly, he would have been, and we wouldn't have gone to war in 1991, and it's amazing. One of the really fascinating things also is that one of the things I learned also was that actually the Rabin administration in Israel began to look at Saddam Hussein as a potential ally. And was thinking of reaching out to him around the time that Rabin was assassinated. Was this in the first Gulf War or pre-Gulf War? Post-Gulf War. This was he was assassinated, I think, in 95, I think, and it was right around like 94, 95. And when they basically, the Israeli government starts to see Iran as a much more dangerous potential enemy. And they start, and according to, again, this man O'Connell, whose book I recommend. I mean, I want everybody to read my book, but I also think people should read O'Connell's book because it just blew me away. It overturns everything, so many things that I thought were sort of settled in terms of the region's history.
Mm-hmm. And when Saddam Hussein met Donald Rumsfeld, this was at a time where not only is he fighting Iran with conventional weapons, but he's also using chemical weapons as well, which some argue were the blueprints or the means to produce them were supplied by the West. And this was also another reason why the United States justified its war in 2003. But you said something in your book that you discovered that Saddam Hussein had not given the order to use chemical weapons in the Halabja campaign against the Kurds.
Yes.
And that changes a lot about how one would view him.
Yeah, of course. And the thing is, we didn't give a damn when that happened in 1988. We didn't give a damn.
Correct.
And the thing is, and then all of a sudden, 15 years later, something has to be done about this man because he used chemical weapons on his own people. And the thing is, and I believed it. Part of my whole experience of dealing with Saddam and talking to him is that as we talk and as we discuss things, I mean, the justifications for the war the legs start getting pulled out from underneath it one by one. And Halabja is one of them. It's just, we had been told time and again that he's irresponsible and that he will, if he has weapons of mass destruction, he will use them. And then I find out that, he never gave this order, and that actually it was a battlefield decision. Now, I mean, Saddam enabled the person who did give the order to do this, and that was a mistake. But the thing is that he never himself gave that order, and that is something that changes fundamentally the understanding of who this man is.
I would definitely put the burden of blame on him because he's the head of state, but it does make a distinction between someone who gives an order and doesn't give an order. Final moments. This was one of the reasons why the United States argued for the war against Saddam Hussein, and this was around 2002, 2003. But you had written also and said in multiple interviews that he was becoming more distant from the daily affairs of governing, and that he was handing off more of the responsibility for governing Iraq to people like his foreign minister Tariq Aziz, or one of his deputies. I believe his name was, oh, that's right, Izzat Ibrahim
Al-Duri.
Al-Duri. That's correct. And he was not caught for many years. He was one of the few that got away.
But he just recently, I believe, he died recently. Within the last, I think, 6 months. He finally. It's ironic because our take on Izzat Ibrahim Al-Duri was that he was a very sick man, like throughout his life, and he outlived all of them. But I did recall seeing his obituary in the New York Times. And there were a lot of times where he was thought to have been killed and then hadn't been, but now I believe that there's conclusive evidence that he is dead now.
Yeah, I did read that a year ago, at least a year, that he had passed away. I don't know if he was killed by American airstrikes, or was it fighting with ISIS, or they said that he had aligned temporarily with ISIS.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, which has led this sort of cottage industry of now trying to sell, like that Saddam was a crypto Islamist, that he was that Saddam fostered the rise of ISIS, and nothing could be further from the truth. He detested the Islamists, and he was their biggest enemy, and he was very good at rooting them out.
In one of your chapters where it says turban in politics, or where he was saying that religious people, Saddam Hussein, when he was governing, when he was the leader of Iraq, he said that religious people can vote and run for election, but they have to keep the turban out of politics.
Yeah.
And he was a secular leader, but did you have a conversation with him about his imposing religion throughout the 90s? I mean, he made religion more prevalent in society, even though he would consider himself secular by the end of his life.
Yeah, I think for religion, as far as Saddam had a unusual way of looking at religion. He was a religious man, believe it or not. We used to just laugh. We used to think that it was all for show. And deep down, he was a religious guy. And as he got older, he got more religious. But he was always first and foremost for Saddam Hussein. And he saw religion as a tool that he could use to protect himself, to use against his enemies. He didn't see it as some sort of blind. He didn't infuse himself in some sort of blind faith with his religion, because he knew he could not afford to have religion consume him. Mm-hmm. And so, I think I use this in the book where this anecdote, which I think captures Saddam's views on religion perfectly. Whenever we were debriefing and he was getting tired or he didn't want to talk about a certain topic, he'd say, I think it's time for my prayers. And one of the things that he, as a prisoner, that he was allowed to have was a Quran, and also we had to make time for his prayers. And so, but a lot of times we'd say, well, we'll do that in a few minutes, because we didn't want to allow him to take control of the conversation. Well, anyway, one day we're talking, and he's like, he doesn't want to talk about this topic, and he's like, I think it's time for my prayers. And so we said, okay, well, and we finished on a high note. This guy who was with me, he brings up the fact of, like, Saddam, you remind me a lot of Abraham Lincoln. Now that's a very high praise, and he knows that Lincoln is considered to be one of the great presidents of the United States. Mm-hmm. And so Saddam is intrigued, and he said, why? He said, well, you're both like sort of like a war leader who didn't have any military background, and you found yourself in this terrible war that that almost destroyed your country, and you came from very humble beginnings, and he's drawing all these analogies, and Saddam's really listening, and then finally we hear a knock on the door, and it's the guard. He's like, okay, it's time, it's prayer time, we're ready to take him.
And he would use this as an excuse to get out of conversations that he didn't want to engage in.
Right, exactly. And at that point, Saddam, he just said, he's like, no, it's okay. We'll do prayers later. Yeah, and he's, go on, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that to him, it was a tool.
The sign of
It
a
was,
true narcissist. I was gonna, the
yeah,
sign of a true
yeah,
narcissist. Well,
yeah.
did you
Oh,
all?
yeah. Oh, narcissistic. It's like he wrote the book on that. So,
Well,
I
he
mean,
built
he
statues of
was.
himself as well. Did you got so final question? Well, there's so much we could talk about at this, on this topic, but I know that time is prevalent and short for you. So, but I want to say thank you again for joining the Lebanon Thora podcast. And if there's one thing that I would ask, what would you recommend policymakers in the United States and leaders in the Middle East to learn from the legacy of Iraq?
That not every problem has a solution, and that not every problem requires a military response, and that sometimes it's better to let things be and let them work themselves out rather than think that the Americans have to get involved and provide the solution for whatever. We've done this far too often in our history, and every time we do it, we hate the results.
And again, on that note, thank you for joining us, Mr. Nixon.
Thank you for having me.
This is the Thora Lebanon podcast with Adnan Nasser. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.